Linden, a town with a proud history, a resilient people, and a painful past that continues to echo in the present. It was in this very town just days ago when 21-year-old Ronaldo Peters was shot and killed by the police. The incident sparked outrage and ignited fiery protests in the streets. Amid the protests, another young man, Keon Fudge, was also killed. 2 young lives lost, a community now in mourning, and questions, many questions demanding answer. But this is not the first time Linden has been cast into the national spotlight under tragic circumstances. The mining town still bears the scars of the 2012 unrest, when 3 unarmed protesters were shot and killed by police during a demonstration over electricity tariffs. More than a decade later, the names have changed, but the pain feels familiar. On today's episode of Sources, we'll speak with the Mayor, Sharma Solomon, about the incident and what healing and justice might look like in a town that has experienced far too much grief. Hello, good evening, and welcome to another edition of Sources. I'm your host, Svetlana Marshall. Today, we'll be speaking about Linden and the events that unfolded in recent times. With me, I have the Mayor, Mr. Sharma Solomon. Mr. Solomon, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me, Svetlana, and it's good to be on your program.
Mr. Solomon, last Monday, a tragic incident occurred. Mr. Ronaldo Peters was killed. What is your understanding of the incident?
Let me just say first my sincere condolences to the family of Ronaldo and Mr. Fudgenay. I know we'll speak about him shortly, but to say to both families, our thoughts and prayers are with them. And for them to know that the entire community of Linden at this time, our thoughts and prayers are with the family. As a community, in the past we've had these experiences and we know how to come together to give that sort of solidarity and support, and we are very, very sad at this moment as to what occurred, but nevertheless prepared and resilient to move forward.
And your understanding of the incident, the first incident that transpired that resulted in the death of Mr. Peters?
Over the period of the incident, the community of Linden, and more so the area that Mr. Peters is from, it was reported by the police, and I think that is where we'll start from, because a lot of what the public was made aware of is through the police reports that a young man was wanted, and subsequently police who identified themselves in an identified marked vehicle and police who identified themselves in uniform proceeded to a site where they were informed someone was wanted, and subsequent to that they conducted an execution where someone was shot. That was the report that was given to the public. Eyewitnesses, however, who were present on the scene disputed that, and disputed that because what they saw in essence is what they saw was a crime committed by someone who failed to identify themselves, someone who came in an unmarked vehicle, someone who came with guns drawn, and someone who saw an unarmed youth running from the scene and instantly fired a shot. So that in itself contradicted the police report that was given to the public, and in essence outraged most of the young men who witnessed that incident as it unfolded.
Mr. Solomon, the police in its report said that it was while attempting to apprehend Mr. Peters that the gun went off, indicating in a sense that it was an accident. It wasn't the police intention to shoot him. Do you think that was an accident? Do you think that the police should have been armed with a firearm with live rounds?
I think You know, what is most important in this would be the statements of eyewitnesses and evidence that are present, whether it's those recorded evidence. I know many persons have recorded this incident. I know what we have also would have been a very detailed approach by leadership to take statements and to have witnesses to give their information. In fact, we are putting together a legal approach to that. However, let me say that what we witnessed, and I continue to repeat this, what we saw and what those young men witnessed for the murder of Mr. Peters was a crime, because the police report indicated first that every approach taken by Officer Kendall was in line with standard SOPs. The evidence so far from witnesses and from video evidence have so far contradicted that. One. So to say that the statement carries any sort of truth was one in the meeting with the president that we asked for that statement to be immediately retracted. One. After the shooting, we saw further video evidence of Mr. Peters being dragged into an unmarked vehicle, alive, still moving. Now, to the extent that Mr. Peters was such a wanted criminal and he was unarmed, it meant no need for the police to take that sort of action even after the fact, which in itself went against their SOPs in many regards. So we are quite clear, not only as witnesses who saw the event, but even those evidence that are out there in terms of video information that contradicts the police statement.
Now, the police in its statement also said that they were going to launch an investigation, and we're going to get to the investigation because the president also spoke about an independent investigation being done. But aside from that, the incident led to, outrage,
Yes.
caused a lot of outrage, and persons protested, although the police said that they were going to investigate it, right? Investigate the incident. Do you think that there was a need, or help us understand why residents felt the need to protest, notwithstanding a commitment from the police, from the Ministry of Home Affairs, that, hey, this incident occurred, but there will be an investigation done as to, what happened, and that those responsible will be held accountable?
I think there are several factors that must be considered, and we can take some historical perspective of police treatment in this community of Linden and the sort of police trust that residents do have in terms of law enforcement and their ability to conduct impartial, in fact, investigations. I think not only from the 18th of July, but we can go very far back. Even this community is noted for excessive use of force by the state, more so the coercive arm of the state. And I think for those reasons, historically, people have a sort of relationship with law enforcement that don't allow them, once those conduct or misconduct are executed, to investigate themselves and do it appropriately. So that is part of the history of policing in this community. But more than that, I think having the first statement released by the police completely misrepresenting the incident, and with so many hours lapse and no senior official in terms of the Ministry of Home Affairs, first to engage the family of the murdered young man, and second, to even engage the leadership to have an understanding of where the disagreement of that statement and the witnesses in terms of what they saw. So the matter was left, except for the leaders, the local leaders, to ensure that we do a few things, which we did. First, to ensure that the family members were okay, which we did, and ensuring that those persons who were affected, that they've received the sort of help, support, and assurance that they will receive the justice that they deserve. That's the first thing. Those angry young men weren't our responsibility not to make for us to have now to intervene, except to bring calm to the situation, which the community leaders attempted to do. However, it is the police and their behavior and conduct and that statement that misrepresented the truth that agitated those angry young men.
So you're saying that it was the response from the police, the initial response, the statement that agitated residents of the community from which Mr. Peters came. But some have said that it was local politicians, opposition politicians, who in a sense instigated these residents, instigated whatever transpired, and ought to be held responsible for fueling the protests. And there was also concern about, damage to public infrastructure. What's your take on that?
No, I think those are very legitimate concerns. And again, in this era of social media, the presence of local leaders, the action and conduct of local leaders are quite well recorded and captured. I know initially at the incident we had both the deputy mayor and the vice chairman of the region and of the town of Linden, and they were both on their live, and we can listen clearly as the crowd continued to erupt. It was the deputy mayor who asked for a dispersal of the crowd, and everyone went home after that incident. So there is nowhere we can say that efforts and attempts were not made by local leaders, which are very evident, and which right after the fact of those dispersal, no one was there after the leaving of those two officials after the incident. So anything happened after that, again, resulted from the police statement, which again we asked the president to retract, and I have not seen that retraction because the evidence have now contradicted clearly that Mr. Peters was unarmed, that the officer who shot him failed to identify himself and he was not with uniform, and they arrived on the scene in an unmarked vehicle, and in essence you're now hearing accidental shooting. Those are the things that inflame persons who actually witnessed that shooting.
Just for clarity, you're saying that it was after the regional vice chairman left and the deputy mayor left the scene that the protests continue in a sense?
Well, those are things the police will have to investigate, but what I can assure you is that after the dispersal of persons who assembled at the Wisma police station, that was the assembly point. After that dispersal, everyone went home.
Okay.
What happened after then, the police will have to investigate.
And what were you told with regards to Mr. Fudgenay? Now, I was told that he was not even engaged in the protests, but he too was caught in the fire, the crossfire, yes, and was killed.
Again, so we had a most unfortunate rules of engagement in terms of the SOPs of the Guyana Police Force. And I spoke earlier about the historical understanding of this community and policing and how we see the rules of engagement. It is most time shoot to kill. It is most time arrive on the site with live rounds. It is most times persons are arriving without a proper or clear understanding of how to engage in terms of public disorder and public protest. And those were very evident the following day, the Tuesday, where we saw Mr. Fudgenay being killed. First, after such an incident with Mr. Peters, one would have expected a better crowd control mechanism. Those things were further escalated repeatedly by the police action, the police report, the police which was false, the police behavior in terms of their engagement with the crowd. And at every time, you cannot throw local leaders in to then deal with those bad behavior and those SOPs that are breached by the police to say they must now control what the police are must be responsible for. So here comes Mr. Fudgenay. How do you then bring live rounds onto a protest site when you have the option of tear gas, when you have the option of ensuring that you use pellet, rubber bullets? And again, we know these from the COIs of the 18th of July of what those SOPs should be in terms of people and their engagement. The police and their response were ill prepared to deal with what they would have caused to begin with. And in that behavior, Mr. Fudgenay was shot. Now, how do you explain a young man coming from Georgetown, not part of a protest action, coming home to his 4 children after a hard day of work, nowhere posed a threat to life, limb, or property? He did not, but receive a single shot to the face. Those are things that must be investigated, and it must not be placed in terms of how the crowd responded. Because we can go in reflection. You cannot say property, life, and limb have been damaged, because no damage is there to show of life, property, and limb. There are only 2 dead men at the hands of the Guyana Police Force.
Now, what are your thoughts on the government response? I know we've seen statements put out by the Ministry of Home Affairs, and also the President spoke about this. In fact, he visited Linden on Tuesday and met with families of the victims. What are your thoughts about the response, not only from the police or the handling of it by the Ministry of Home Affairs, but the government in particular, a promise by the President that there will be an independent investigation and that the investigation will be done by the regional security system? Is that sufficient?
It was good to see that the President met the demands of the family and the community to come to the community, as the representatives that were sent by the President was sent with a clear instruction to have the family be taken to Georgetown, to which their objection was that they will not go to Georgetown. We had one family who was prepared to do so, and in consideration, in fact reconsideration, both families demanded that the President be present in Linden, which he did come to Linden. So I'm glad that he listened to those requests and demands.
So you're saying there was a request from government for the families to travel to Georgetown?
Yeah, we had 2 senior officers in Deputy Commissioner McBean, and I think it's senior officer in the Guyana Defense Force, Mr. Howell, who said that they were sent by the President. I was in that meeting at Haimara Park, and with the families we were discussing, it's on my Facebook Live, what it is that the President and the government is prepared to do in terms of providing the justice that the family needed. And they were being invited. In fact, myself was also being invited to be part of the party to head to Georgetown, and we refused to go to town. And we said that the family should have an engagement with the President in Linden. It was at that point that we were told, and I found this to be I found this to be very disappointing, that 2 young men were shot and killed, and we were still trying to negotiate if the President should be in Linden. I think anywhere else we would have seen differently. Anywhere else in Guyana, I think the President would not have had to be demanded to come to a community after seeing 2 young men gunned down by the coercive arm of the state. It was most unfortunate that we had to negotiate that point, and that the President and any senior minister, they were prepared not to be in this community 24 hours after that incident. I think those are very troubling situations that the public in general, and Linden in particular, should take note of. That it was, if not the family's demand, the President would not have been in Linden.
And I asked you about the assurance given by the President that there will be an investigation, an independent investigation, and that it will be done by the regional security system. Are you satisfied with that approach? And are the families satisfied with that approach?
I think the families are prepared to have further legal understanding of what is actually occurring. I'm encouraged that before the day is out, we will be having that discussion with some legal representation and the families in terms of them being invited to give statements themselves. We've also said to them how they proceed would be very, very important at this point, with a proper legal understanding of how to proceed. Those matters that were brought up while the President was meeting with the family of Mr. Fudgenay were very clear. We asked that though the RSS would have been identified, the regional security system, to investigate, that we wanted to see clear terms of reference. I think we are very concerned that we're hearing of an investigation and we don't know the terms of reference and the scope of this investigation to ensure that it covers the true justice that is needed in this matter, in fact, both matters. And again, to indicate that, in fact, in our conversation, and it's live, you'll see my live, when that proposal was made by Deputy Commissioner McBean and the Army officer, Owell, we were told that though it's an independent investigation, the option was the RSS, and the President came with the RSS. The families expressed their concerns of the ability of the RSS, referencing, and again, you'll hear those discussions, that agency investigated matters that they are not satisfied with how those matters were pursued. For example, the Henry boys, Mr. Boston, and they believe also Mr. Bacchus. Those were issues that brought up at the meeting when it became time to speak on the SOPs of the security system that was identified as independent by the head of state to conduct this investigation. And I think it is at that point the family is asking if independence means that they too have a choice to choose which agency they too would want to consider to be part of the investigation or to conduct the investigation. So that was the first issue in terms of the SOPs. The other issues would have been dealt with through MP Amanzo Walton, who was part of the meeting too, that asked for the removal of the police commander and to also a proper handling of those two officers, Mr. Kendall and Mr. I'm trying to remember the other gentleman's name, that are, and both have been under close arrest, we were told, and we hope that that in itself is dealt with in terms of how we see any other criminal proceedings. The other thing that we also asked about would have been social care and support for the family, including the children of those two young men that were killed, including Mr. Fudgenay, who was with 4 children, 3 boys and a girl, and also was the sole provider for even the extended families. We've asked also for social care for Mr. Peters, who is with a 1-year-old, 3-month baby girl, and is with a young wife that certainly is in need of the sort of support and care. So those things were assured, but on the community side, the community remains concerned about the general interaction with the Guyana Police Force, and even the government intention when it comes to ensuring that use of force is there to deal with any protest action or any issue that they find of disagreement. It happens nowhere else in Guyana. Nowhere else in Guyana you see the Guyana Police Force turning up with live ammunition, and people that are part of any protest action are dead, except in Linden.
Now, you spoke about nowhere else in Guyana, and I want to take you back to 2012, when you served as the regional chairman of Region 10. Now, in 2012, in July 2012, there was what we call the unrest over electricity tariffs. There was a proposal to increase the tariffs by a system of gradualism and selectivity by the then government. The people resisted that proposal. And now it ended, and in fact it spanned for several days. But during the course, or in fact on the 18th of July, 3 unarmed protesters were killed. Today, in 2025, we see a young man, Mr. Peters, and then another young man, Mr. Fudgenay, being shot and killed by the police again. Do you think these are fatal incidents as a result of deeper systemic issues that are not being addressed? And I know that following the 2012 unrest, there was a commission of inquiry that was done, and recommendations were put forward.
Certainly.
Do you think that the police would have, not the police, but the state would have acted on those recommendations?
I think, you know, the important thing about the 18th of July, and one of the things that we found very important was that we had a commission of inquiry, that you had no such commission of inquiry in almost 30 to 40 years of those sort of killings by the state agency, more so the coercive arm of the state. It was important to see the recommendations and those things that came out. And one of the most important things that came out of that report was that on the 18th of July, it was only the Guyana Police Force who had guns and who were doing the shooting on the bridge, Wisma Mackenzie. That was very clear. And in fact, in that, it ordered the payment of compensation. And it went deeper to recommend a few things in terms of police rules of engagement and how they use those SOPs. So for me, I think what the government was more concerned about was paying those compensation, which were meager, and the family subsequently sued. They were paid for the compensation only January of this year, 2025. However, those meager compensation were $3, $2, and $1 million, as we can remember. But outside of that, they just took that Commission of Inquiry report and did not do the sort of systemic adjustments. And I think at the change of government, we saw some efforts to do that, where we saw even the divisional policing being dismantled to now reflect regional policing. We saw even the structures of the police force being attempted to be addressed. Because if you don't address the structural failure, then those culture of bad behavior, of not following the SOPs, become a habitual thing that is hard for persons to not to follow. So those things were not looked at because the structure, and we see even at the wider context today of the sort of dilemma the police force finds itself in, to be a rules and regulation agency, but being accused with so many things against the structure of the force, which brings about a culture of people's delinquency, a culture of persons believing that the Guyana police force is one where they don't have confidence in what the police is going to do. And those things are reflected in community policing, as we see within Linden, and when those COIs and recommendations are not implemented. So yes, it's a very systemic thing, and we told the president this, because when the request was made by MP Desir for the removal of the police commander, it was further suggested by her that there seems to be a wider systemic issue within the Guyana police force. I think before that was said, the country is quite aware of that, and it is because of not only the 18th of July recommendations that are not being implemented, but several other recommendations that were made even by the United Kingdom and so many agencies that came in to help the Guyana police force, that we know of those recommendations to strengthen it as an institution and allow it to build the capacity that it needs. However, those recommendations, like the 18th of July, remains on someone's desk yet to be implemented.
Now break it down for me. What specific recommendations that you as the mayor would like to see happen to prevent any such reoccurrence? We shouldn't be another 5-10 years from now having this same conversation when we've had it in 2012. What are some of the steps you would like to see taken?
I think structurally we can start with the very senior position. I think we have issues when it comes to very, very senior within the police force, and I'm not the one making the accusation. It's before the court at the moment of some of those matters, whether their allegations are true. It is just where the Guyana police force at that level finds itself. One, I think that needs to be corrected and depoliticized first. Depoliticized and allow professionals to do their jobs and professionals to be part of the hierarchy of the system so they can act and conduct professional service to the people. I think that's first and foremost in the structural issue that will make the police not only a force but a better service to the public. Outside of that, I think internal to the force and the structure becomes one of our junior officers and their payment. And how do we ensure that police are given the sort of resources to first conduct good policing, that they're equipped? You know, one of the things we said to the president is that every on-duty uniformed police officer, in fact, it was made known that is with a carrying a firearm, should have a camera on them. Once you leave the station with the police gun, you have to have a camera on you. Those are things that are reforms that are there to be applied and have not been properly applied. So there are many reforms that are there structurally. Payment for our police officers, I think it's the most miserable pay we can find for persons who give the sort of services that our police officers give. I know we have many good men and women in uniform, and they need to be treated far better, not only in the pay, but many packages of remuneration, housing, proper pension, benefits that will allow them to want to act and behave professionally. So those structures among some I would like to see. Also, as it relates to the relationship of the community and the police and how that is done, I think there are so many things in terms of the social side of how that relationship can improve. In terms of sports, I know there are efforts, but I know we can go deeper. In terms of leadership, I can give this for example. The last police commander that came, I'm someone who's been given public service for several years, and I've had the opportunity to meet several police commanders. And the last commander that came, I've never met him. You know, he came to Linden. There is a courtesy call that is paid by all the police commanders to establish their presence and what they intend to bring in terms of their policing skills and ability. I know the gentleman, but on this occasion, just that type of interaction and relationship helps. And I'll tell you why it helps. Because he did not, for 3 or 2 weeks in Linden, took the time, I don't know where he is, who he is, to even engage the mayor. But when the eruption began, the first person they attempted to call was the mayor to engage the public on their behalf.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that the police commander was recently assigned to this district?
Yes.
And you, earlier in your remarks, you spoke about a request to have him transfer.
This was done by, yes,
was
MP
he transferred?
Yeah, as I am not aware, but I know that was a request that was made, and that could be inquired to be to be established. But I know that was under
Now,
request.
I know years ago, and this was a big thing across the country, but in Linden in particular, I remember hearing a lot of talks about police-community relationship and a lot of activities surrounding that kind of scenario. What's the state of affairs now? What's the relationship between the community and the police? And now that this incident has happened, how are residents coping, and how do you move forward?
I think the police came in for the local police that we have, and that's most unfortunate when we have police officers that can bring disrepute to an entire force that we depend on to give service and protection of our population. There are many good men and women in the Guyana Police Force, hard-working men and women in the Guyana Police Force. And they must know not only in level of leadership, but the general public, we do appreciate your presence and the work that you do. What was very evident in this particular incident is that Mr. Kendall, who left this community before because of several complaints of bad behavior, was returned to this community. And we see in his return the perpetration of his action and what it resulted in, the death of a young man, Mr. Peters. Now, that sort of relationship is one where even the recent police commander, Mr. Nurse, was one where we established weekly meetings between the police high command and the regional official. I know we have a regional security committee that is under the chairmanship of the regional chairman. And we do meet monthly to have our updates. So at the level of leadership, there is the intent, there is the willingness, and there are the mechanisms to stay engaged and to stay relatable to the police. As you mentioned before, even in the 18th of July, I remember myself and now Commissioner Hickins, we were meeting frequently in my office to ensure that we understand what was happening on the ground at any given time, and this was before the 18th incident. As persons know, we were having several protests action leading up to the 18th. So at the level of leadership and at the level of the community, we are very responsible to understand that there must be a working relationship with the Guyana Police Force and the community and how they work.
And what would you say to residents who are looking on and maybe, feeling, have a little distrust of the police, but feeling angry at the same time? And what would you say to the police to ensure that we better, in a sense, the relationship between the public and the police, and understand that the police also have a very important, as you would have said, important role to play in society?
I think both sides are very understandable. I think the public should be understood if they are very hurt. People should understand that what occurred in this town contradicts what we saw the police put out for us as a statement that a young man wanted was killed by identified police in identified vehicle. Nothing like that occurred. That sort of behavior in itself is what brings mistrust, and we hope those things that will change. But also the issue of how do we see the police being understood by the public that they have a job and a role to play is very dependent on their professional conduct. And we see that in many officers. I think many of the family members were very commendable of some of the local officers who conduct themselves and who, so there is no animosity between the police force. As I said before, we had our recent departed commander who was very engaged in many of the structured approach of the region. So there is no, we had an individual, and further to that, another individual that came into the community to deal with a protest action. First shot Mr. Peters, that individual who came back into this community, and second, those officers that they brought in to quell the protest brought in someone else who shot Mr. Fudgenay. So it is not the local police who would have many times established good relationships with the public and who the public can trust and work with. But many times we are questioning, why are some of these police with bad behaviors who left this community were returned, and when they return, we see the consequences of the action that they took.
Mr. Solomon, oftentimes whenever there is a protest in Linden, and I could reference to the 2012 protests and the recent protests, there were reports of the bridge being blocked. Why do you think residents resort to the blocking of the bridge? And in fact, I remember in 2012 in particular, the government spoke about this, and there were even talks about having another route to the other regions because of the fear that, this bridge could be blocked at any time. What's your thought on that? Why so?
Well, I think you made mention of often, and you just mentioned only two. Now, the point is, you're quite correct that often when we do have protest action in this community, it's quite peaceful. It is without blocking arteries, bridges. It is without any obstruction to the daily lives of our own residents and citizens. I think what we have when you have, in very extraordinary cases, in very outrageous behavior by the state and the arm of the state, then it is difficult to control the rage of persons in terms of the things that they do, in terms of civil disobedience. The bridge reflects a very main artery, just like any piece of infrastructure, highway, bridges, and any type of intersection that will carry the sort of impression that will bring the sort of attention one, and results that most people believe too, that you see in any protest action. So you're saying for those few protest action where persons would have taken such approach, certainly. But in the mainstream, I think our approach to ensure that we protest for attention without any obstruction to civil and civic life have been well documented to show it's mostly how we intend to first conduct ourselves. Unless those protesters feel provoked I think those extreme actions then are what people turn to those infrastructure for.
Now, as we prepare to wrap up, your closing remarks, but before you do so, it would be remiss of me not to ask. I know at the time Linden was dealing with this very tragic incident. In fact, on Monday we had one young man was killed. On Tuesday, another. And it's important I didn't establish the fact that the protest has ended and Linden has returned to a state of normalcy. Is that safe to say?
I would say it's cautiously there.
It's cautiously there. Now, on social media, we see videos in circulation with regards to your interaction with the president. Why not shake the hands of the president as a leader, a local leader, and he's the president, the head of state?
I will say this, in my character, it takes nothing away from me to have greetings and salutations in the name of Almighty God, which means that in myself provokes a sort of peaceful arrangement with myself and anyone that I engage, which if it means a handshake. I have met the president before at my swearing-in exercise at the Linden Convention Center, and I shook his hands. We shook hands. So shaking the president's hands is not anything that I am unaware, unfamiliar, unacquainted with. What occurred on Tuesday was most unfortunate. I think it demonstrates at that level a sort of hypocrisy on the part of the president, who makes the issue of handshake a matter. I've never made the issue of handshake a matter. As I said, I shook the president's hands before. However, the president came into the meeting, he walked the entire front row, and I dare anyone to challenge what we are saying. There are already video evidence partially showing that. There are more evidence that are available. That he walked the front row, he shook man, woman, and children. I was the last person seated in the row, and he passed and he went to the back of the crowd. I said anything? I said nothing about the fact that maybe that is the conduct that the president chose to adopt at this time, and I respect that. While he was returning to the front of the meeting, subsequent to that, MP Figueroa sat next to me. We both acknowledged each other's presence. And on returning to the front, the president stopped, he shook the MP's hand. And then he attempted to shake my hands, and I reminded him. I said, you just saw me, you passed straight. And he said, no problem, and he shook my hand. He took my hands up to shake it again. I never refused that. But just again to show the sort of hypocrisy of the president himself to make the handshake an issue, which there was none. Because I never refused to begin with, and I would never refuse to shake the hands of anyone who is sincere in understanding that what a handshake means. It means the demonstration of peace between each other.
Now, closing remarks, and in those remarks, could you, I know the tongue will soon have its Linden Tongue Week celebration of the tongue's anniversary, and so could you tell us, what is your vision for Linden going forward, and what you'd like to see done?
55 years, 1970, Linden, the heart of Guyana, coming off of the bauxite generation, a very industrial and industrious tongue. Would have demonstrated not only why we are the heart of Guyana geographically positioned to embrace 6 other regions, but because of the sort of resources that allow for Guyana to, before our bauxite generation, have prospered from. And currently, with almost 65% of the natural resources coming from or through this region, demonstrates why we are the heart of Guyana. With that being said, our intention as a municipality is then to position Linden to reflect such in terms of its ability to produce and persons' interest to want to invest in the heart of Guyana. In this year Tongue Week, we are not only going to promote the issue of the entertainment and arts in a very large way, but we are very grateful for companies like OneCom, who have now come on board, and we are now working to have the first International Investment Forum. I'm glad that they're working with the local Chamber of Commerce so that we can demonstrate exactly why we are the heart of Guyana in terms of our ability to not only sustain this community and Guyana in terms of resources, but how we can show the world that Linden is a hub for international trade and development. So those are things we want to use Linden Tongue Week as a vehicle to promote those sort of agenda. In terms of the vision of where that vehicle takes us, in this oil and gas economy, in this rapid advancement of where Guyana is moving, it is to profile Linden as part of that and position Linden into the national agenda and how we see the general development. So, for example, the resources that we have already been exploiting and developing, to see many of those remain in the region for further development. For example, I was in Ichuni a few days ago, and most of the logs and timber coming out, people want to see furniture manufacturing company in Ichuni. We have bauxite mining in both in Ichuni, Kokwani, and in Linden, and some of the richest Kilwen pits are in Ichuni. People want to see ceramics, people want to see different byproducts that could remain from this community that are part of the national development and further development. So those are things that our history have shown that we have the ability to do. Linden before have demonstrated a hub for international trade, but at the same time, our ability to produce good artisans, to ensure we have good labor, so we have good labor market. Lindeners have been taming the jungles of this country for the longest while, whether it's Reunion Gold, Oh My Gold, Araima, Lindeners are always out there. So we do have skills, we have the ability for manufacturing with some of the most cheapest and reliable electricity in Guyana. We do have the ability for construction. We see a lot of the construction material for the building of roads and buildings in terms of sand, laterite, and stone being moved from the community. So there are many things in that investment forum that we hope to highlight come this Linden Tongue Week as part of where we want to see the Tongue Week itself start to take a new dimension outside of just wetting and fetting, to have these sort of investment forums.
Okay. Mr. Solomon, thank you so much for sharing.
No problem.
And as we prepare to wrap up this edition of Sources, I would just like to say also condolences to the family of Mr. Peters and Mr. Fudgenay. And we'll stay watching closely the outcome of that investigation that will be done by the Regional Security System. With that, I've been your host, Svetlana Marshall.